Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life. Hey everybody, in this episode I've got an old friend of mine, Craig Caudill, who runs the Nature Reliance School. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and your background, Craig?
Oh man, pleasure to be here, man. It's I run Nature Reliance School. We started NRS in 2006. Basically what I was doing was I had been teaching martial arts full time, and several of my students had shown interest in doing some outdoor stuff. And so I started taking the Uchideshi out and teaching them some of the outdoorsy stuff that I do. And it just kind of exploded inside the dojo. A lot of people wanted that sort of training too. And so Nature Reliance School grew out of that to what it is today, where we have, we train military, federal law enforcement, state law enforcement, thousands of civilians and all that kind of stuff. I write books and all those kind of good things. But it was a pretty much a natural extension of how I grew up. I grew up in the outdoors, just a woodsman, hunter, fisherman, playing in the woods kind of kid. The one thing I did a little bit different than most is I did what most people refer to as period correct reenacting. I dressed up like Daniel Boone, made flint and steel fires and stuff like that. I actually did some flint and steel fires at a local fort for tourist dollars back in the day and tips and stuff like that as a kid. Wearing a loincloth and making flint and steel fires and getting a 5-spot here and there. That was pretty cool for an 8-year-old, So, yeah, I did have a good time growing up. My dad and his uncles shot competitively for the National Muzzleloading Rifle Association. And so I was immersed in that period correct, sleeping in lean-tos and teepees and doing what we call squirrel shoots, which is basically a competition of running through the woods and shooting at targets and throwing tomahawks and knives and all that stuff. I competed on the national level as a kid doing that. And then, that all kind of grew up into just, to put it in a category, just being more self-reliant, is probably a good way of describing it, trying to take care of my own needs. And then it just, again, as I mentioned, just blossomed outside of 2006 out of an outgrowth of my martial arts training to be just this behemoth that it is today. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. It's been a wild ride. I've enjoyed it.
No, that's really cool. And we actually met through the martial arts world back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I remember when you first started kind of branching off in this direction, and it's some good stuff. It's some really good stuff. It's like we talked a little bit before we started recording for the episode that my knowledge of this is strictly from the military.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very limited compared to yours. But I really do think that it's all kind of, like you said, it's all that kind of like being self-reliant, being able to take care of yourself in any situation. And I feel pretty confident that I could survive. I mean, I certainly don't have the expertise you do. But what I'm curious to talk to you about is about, like, when you teach this and you have people train for it, how does that kind of relate to when you were teaching martial arts or teaching, more like a combative athletic pursuit? Like, are there parallels? Is the training
without a
different?
doubt.
Like, how does it work?
No, there's a lot of parallels. And to go back to where we met, one of the reasons that I met you in Chicago training under Sensei Moore was I had been training in a system of Aikido that was, what I will 100% admit at this point, was just garbage. It was a person who didn't have the right background, didn't have the right training, was teaching things that were supposedly Aikido that were not. It was just garbage. And I had been talking with, Moore Sensei when he was still training under Toyota Sensei as an Uchideshi. And and just talking to him briefly about coming up to Chicago about the same time that he started Shinjinkai at Ravenswood, right after he left the AAA. And so one of the things that I discovered just talking to him was I was not in a legitimate source of knowledge. And I think that's really valuable when it comes to training is you got to be close to a source that has legitimacy. And so that's where I started Aikido training up there, met you, and then the parallels that come out of it is exactly that. And there's a lot of illegitimate ways of practice. I kind of go through the way I like to describe it is that there's practice, there's testing, and then there's training in bushcraft, and it could be semantics that we discuss. You probably call it something else, but I'm sure you do something similar. And that, practice is where you get a new firearm. I get a new knife and I practice with it. I put it in my hand. I see what it feels like. I see, I might manipulate the firearm. I might look at the pieces and parts of the knife and how it goes into the kydex or the leather or whatever it is. Testing is where I go out and start practicing with it and testing its limits. And then training is where I induce the stress. I put myself in a rain event to make a bow drill fire. I do all of that with our students at Nature Reliance School too. And what I mean by that, and this week is a perfect example, is our level 1 coursework is what I like to refer to as a camping trip studying the topic. So people come in, I tell them, bring all the stuff, and you can bring a camper if you want to. I don't care if we're studying survival or navigation or tracking or whatever it is that I'm teaching. I want you to sleep good and I want you to eat good, because those are the 2 stressors for people that are new to the outdoors. And we have chairs and we have a big GP tent that we have if we need to get out of the weather and all that kind of good stuff. Then that's what I would call the introductory phase of it. And then our level 2 is where we then start to pull things away. For example, in our level 2, you can only bring in 25 pounds of gear or less, and you've got to make the same amount of time with just 25 pounds of gear. Now, this weekend, we're doing a level 3 course, which we don't do very often. It's a level 3 survival course, and our students are going to walk in the woods with nothing but a knife. 18 degrees. It's supposed to rain 2 solid days, and they're walking in the woods with nothing but a knife. No backpack of gear. Now the instructors carry backup. We mitigate risk. Obviously, we have things set up to take care of our students, but that is kind of how I approach a lot of things in bushcraft and survival. I don't know if that has parallels to what you do. I know it had parallels to martial arts, because, martial arts, you would just do reps, and reps was the way of, practice. And then, you might go to, an actual belt test or something. And that way you can prove that, hey, I have the viability to make these techniques work under a little bit of stress. And then you go to something like where me and you met at a Kangeko or something, where, you're literally having to will, or at least I did. You were in better shape than me. I was literally willing myself up off the mat because I'm smoked. I've been in Lake Michigan doing Boken cuts and bull crap like that. And I'm tired. I'm cold. They've thrown the windows open. At Chicago, it's 10 degrees, and, we're beating the hell out of each other and sweating and all that stuff. And, once you learn how to get past that, me going out this weekend with a knife, it's nothing. It's just life. I've learned how to accept these things.
Yeah. Like I, kind of the approach I've developed, and I apply this to martial arts stuff too now, and this is kind of, it's both informed by like the traditional training I've done and some of the more modern training I've done, and also like the training I've kind of had to devise for myself for shooting and, all of that. Right. I did like a kind of like a deep dive into like, sports psychology and coaching techniques and all this stuff to try to figure out better ways to do this. And I decided that the way it made sense to me to organize training was, you have an experimentation phase, and that's like where you're handling the knife, like you said, and you're figuring out like how it fits in your hand and how it fits in the scabbard and all that, right? Then you've got the isolation phase, which is the reps. That's,
Isolation. I like that word.
doing 1,000 cuts with the boken, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got to do combination work. And that would be like a seminar, like a Kengeko, where you're putting things together and you're having to work on a bunch of things at the same time, right?
Right.
And then I separate all of that from the validation, the testing. And the testing is where it's on the line and it's pass or fail, and you get one chance, one shot. Right? And that's kind of how I organize it now, right?
Right. No, I like it. I like that methodology.
But so how much of what you've learned about survival and bushcraft and all that, how much was self-taught and how much did you seek out from other people? I'm kind of curious.
Early on, everything I learned from my dad and uncles and experiences on my own. Like when I was a young man, again, I mentioned that I did some period corrector enacting, which I thought was hardcore at the time. As a 13-year-old, I'm sleeping in a teepee, and if we don't kill squirrels, we don't eat this week, kind of thing. But what I discovered is that, when I was in my early 20s, I wanted to test myself. So I went out in the spring. It was spring, summer, and I stayed in the woods for 30 days with nothing but a knife by myself. That was back before I hadn't. I mean, and when I'm saying this, I want to be real clear to your listeners. Part of what I did was cool, and I'm glad I'm here to talk about it, but it was pretty stupid. It was pretty foolhardy. But what happened to me is that spring, summer was a cakewalk, man. It was a cakewalk because the weather was hospitable, wasn't problematic. I found everything I needed to find as shelter, water, food. Then I have a distinct difference between what I call confidence and cockiness. I was cocky. I went back to do it in the wintertime, and I didn't eat for the first 3 weeks. I nearly died of starvation because I did not know what I was doing. Again, this is in my early 20s when I thought I knew what I was doing. I didn't know what I was doing. I did not know what I was doing. And it humbled me, which was great. I love being humbled. I love learning, hey, man, you need this. So I started self-instruction of a lot of things. Started seeking out family. At that point in time, I still thought, I was in college at the time, but I thought that those types of skills like farming, homesteading, canning, killing cattle and for food or chickens and raising eggs and all that stuff that I grew up doing, I thought all that was family type stuff. And the way I grew up, that included the hunting, the fishing, and all that. That was just all family stuff. That was not something you did necessarily with strangers. You did that with people that were family or somebody that was really close to family. And what happened to me was upon this path of learning on my own, I had a martial arts student, an Aikido student, that came to me and said, man, I went to this place. This guy loves to play in the woods and do all the survival stuff. You should go. And it was a brochure from the tracker school, Tom Brown's tracker school. And I didn't know who that was. I had no idea who it was. And so I thought about going, and I ended up finding another instructor, Richard Cleveland, who lit a fire under me. I don't know how else to say it. Very inspirational instructor. I went to his training, paid what I considered a very, it was well worth the money that I paid for a week of training, and then realized while I was there, everything that we're doing, I've been doing for fun my entire life. And this guy's getting paid to teach people how to do it. Now I have to learn how to not only do it better, but also learn how to teach it to strangers, which is an incredible skill. That's one of the reasons I've interviewed and talked to so many SF guys like yourself about, because you guys, in my opinion, I'm not just talking about you, I'm just talking about the special forces community in general. You guys are the best in the world at going into a place where you don't know people and making a lot of cool things happen. I mean, it's just, and so that skill set, that communication, that leadership, learn how to lead when you need to know when you need to lead, learn how to follow when you need to follow, all those types of skills I needed to learn how to do outside of my family. So I did. I started going to as many schools as I possibly could go to, outdoor schools. Those were tracking schools, survival schools, bushcraft schools, learn how to navigate, in navigation schools, just all the stuff. It was both from going to schools like what I do now, running Nature Reliance School, as well as I got heavily involved in wildlife habitat management because I had some property at the time. I was trying to increase the wildlife habitat on the property. Got really involved in the academic side of forest ecology. And so I started studying with a lot of the professors at the University of Kentucky, at the Department of Fish and Wildlife here in my state, to just understand the outdoors better from an academic perspective, which only enhanced my understanding as what I call a proper woodsman, how to be a steward of the land, how to take from what you need to take and steward it so that it continues to provide what it needs to provide.
I kind of, as a side note, because we were talking about how, a lot of the skills you have, I have like a very base introduction to because of the military, very, very basic.
Sure.
But I will say this, the land navigation training I got and practice I got I think that was world-class.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
And it's an interesting skill when you're first trying to learn it.
Right.
It really is. Your pace count and reading the map and being able to look at the map and see how it looks on the ground. And
sure.
And those are some of both my fondest and most hated memories from selection of the Q course. Right.
Was the nav.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'll like this story. My son went to basic, so he's got a certain skill set because he grew up with me and he was helping me teach everything. And so from when he was just old enough to get out in the woods, he would go with me. He's trained everybody from SF dudes to, school kids. I mean, he's been with me the whole time. But when he went to basic, he was like, I can't wait to get into nav because I'm going to crush nav in basic training, And so he got paired up with 2 or 3 imbeciles and they go out and about 20 meters into the first waypoint. One of them loses the frickin' protractor. One of them, this is good drill sergeant stuff, right? One of them had the compass, one of them had the map, and one of them had the protractor. And the dude that had the protractor lost it about 20 meters in. So now my son is out doing, as good trained association as he can possibly do. So yeah, nav is a beautiful skill. Nav opens the door, in my opinion. Nav opens the door to people doing what I do. You don't have to stay on the trail anymore. You get to go explore. And this idea of exploration, I think, is something that's desperately missing in our current world, where people they're not, and we've talked about this briefly before we got on camera. People are basically being told what they should consume as far as food and entertainment and everything. And they're also told stay on the trail, leave no trace. And, no, I'm going off trail, man. I'm going off the trail.
And back to making a metaphor out of all this, right? So like we talked about how, mastery, the search for mastery makes everything better, I think, in your life.
Oh yeah.
You don't master anything without exploration. There's no way to become the master of any craft without exploring things on your own.
Sure. Inner self or outer self.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. So tracking, you got to tell me about tracking, because that is a skill that I always wished I'd had and don't have. I mean, like I can track a wounded deer, but that's not really tracking. You know what I mean?
Tracking's my jam, Matt. If I could teach tracking every day of my life, I would, and I would abandon everything else. It's absolutely the most humbling, growth-oriented practice I've ever done in my life, and that includes martial arts training. Okay, I mean it's fantastic. I call it tracking for transformation. There's not much you do in tracking that you don't develop the self in the process of tracking. But there's a lot to it. But basically, my perspective on it is, well, and I should say this too. I learned a lot of tracking from my dad. But it was limited to basically what you're describing, being able to track some deer or maybe set up traps for trapping or something of that nature. So that was a valuable animal skill set, being able to track critters, right? But I went to one of these classes, again, in my early 20s, where I had an instructor saw a track on the ground and he said something about this human track of, I can tell this. And I said, explain to me how. I thought he was being crazy, right? explain to me how you can see that. And he did. And he was right. And I was like, okay, whatever just happened, I want to be able to do that. And I have been trying to do that for the last 25 years. So tracking, if I dwindle it down to its simplest terms, is baseline versus disturbance. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Same thing for situational awareness, and just because it's you, I'm not saying that I know these things. These are just things I've studied. It might be similar to understanding the battlefield space. What's the disturbance that I see? I give that my attention. Same thing in tracking. When I see something, I should know how the baseline of that environment looks in its most natural state. And anything that looks different from that is what I refer to as disturbance. Once I see that disturbance, then I give it my attention, and then I start to break down the details. Is that an animal? Is that a human? Is that human walking, running? Have they stopped? Is there dwell time there? And there's a lot to that. There's impressions and tracks and the different coloration and value change of the environment, the gait patterns of everything. That is tracking in a nutshell. But it is one of those things that absolutely positive. I try to do something with tracking every day. It is my jam. Meaning, if I'm not out tracking every morning at daylight, I will read something about tracking that day from someone, because it's just what I love to do.
And that goes back into training for mastery, right? Like anybody that masters something has to spend a significant amount of time on that. And I think one of the things people get wrong is they don't understand the importance of consistency and frequency over duration and intensity. Like, it's like the Kangeko we met at, right? Like that was a high duration, high intensity event.
Right.
And those events matter for your training. They're important for your training, but they're like the spice,
Yeah. I like that.
They're not the dish. The dish is what you do every day. If you're a shooter, do you pick up a gun every day and dry fire?
Right.
If you're a martial artist, do you hit the heavy bag or throw some punches and kicks or work on some, like even if you're at home alone and you're a jiu-jitsu guy and, you need a partner to really roll, do you still work on, shrimping or getting up from the mount, regaining your feet? Do you work on all those things that you can do solo? Do you do something every day? And doing something every day means a lot more, I think, than doing a lot every so often.
I would agree with that 100%. Definitely, that would be the same path that I'm on with tracking. Not saying I'm a master of it, that I would like to achieve mastery. And my guess is that I never will. I don't know that I will, but I'm pushing that direction. I want to be able to. It's no different than martial arts training. There's times where old dude gets you. The bear gets you. And sometimes it just doesn't go your way. I mean, there's been times where I get on the track line and I'm like, okay, I'm not feeling it today. I'm not going to get it today. And I've got to overcome that negative self-talk for sure. And there's things that I teach people in tracking on how to overcome that negative self-talk. But there are times also where, maybe it's time to just sit in the woods and pay attention to the surroundings, the environment, and learn from that today, instead of actually getting on a track line and finding each step and moving on it. Sometimes it's good to just sit and take it in.
I saw something I really liked, and this was about fitness training, like working out. It wasn't about, the other stuff we're talking about, but I think this concept applies to everything. Out of every training session for any endeavor, right? You've got this small percentage of sessions that go really badly. You've got this small percentage of sessions that go really well. And then you got a bulk of them where you're just doing the work and not really feeling much either way. But that's where the work gets done.
Right.
Right. Like, it doesn't have to be a personal best. It doesn't have to be a day where everything went perfectly for you. And actually, you're probably not learning as much if it was. Right.
Yeah, I like that.
So that 80% where it's just moving the dirt is what's really important, I think. Some days you just got to move the dirt.
We have what I talked about, the level 3s of survival. We have levels of all of our courses, but what I would call our level 4 is what I call the lost man exercise. And that's where people come to me and And basically they want to do what I did in 30 days. But instead of ignorantly doing it the way I did, where I did not have any backup, and if one wrong thing happened, then I would have died, which was close to what happened. I provide them with the backup. That way they can go out and challenge themselves and push themselves and find out where they're at on such things. And
you're the safety net.
I'm the safety net, as well as some technology, me and technology. I will go visit them, but I will also require them to have a GPS inReach on them so I know where they are at all times. And I've only had one person make it through that more than a week. And these are people that are well-trained, well-established in the woods. They know what they're doing, but the thing that gets them is being alone with their own thoughts.
That's a powerful thing too, right?
It is.
And I think there's a lot of value in friendly competition and a lot of value in like a training community. Like there's a lot of value in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think there's a lot of value in spending a significant amount of the time you're working on something alone.
100%.
Just you and whatever skill you're working to develop, and really being, some people are going to think this is like, martial arts mysticism or whatever, but it really is true. I mean, like mindful practice trumps mindless repetitions. Like really being there, being present, being aware of everything that's happening. And that doesn't mean you don't make a mistake. It means that when you make it, you're completely aware of the fact that you made it. You can figure out why you made it.
Right.
And work on making it less often and making it to a smaller degree and trying to make those little bitty percentage improvements in skill,
You'll like this, man. I got so much hate for this. My first book, I've written 8 books, but my first book is Extreme Wilderness Survival. And the first 5 chapters of that book are on basically developing confidence mentally versus cockiness. And chapter 5, the title of it is about mindfulness. And, I get the awfulest bunch of hate you've ever seen from people that just want to know another trap that they can make, another figure 4 trap. And I'm like, if you do not have mindfulness, you are missing so much about yourself, your environment, the things that are around you, the animals that are around you, the weather. I mean, just having good mindfulness will let you know, something feels different with the barometric pressure. That means that there is a different weather pattern that is happening. Do I have the gear necessary to take care of myself if it starts to pour the rain? That's awareness. We could lump it into situational awareness, but I'd like to add in the idea of mindfulness being a huge aspect of that I'm telling you right now, if there's 100 survival instructors out there, 99 of them will not talk about that topic. And I'll be the one solo guy that's talking about mindfulness and survival. It's just, it's sad. It's sad that people don't see the importance of it.
Well, the mental aspect of any skill, I think, is more important than the physical when you get right down to it. Mm-hmm. Yes, you have to have the physical ability, right? But all the physical ability in the world doesn't do you any good if you're not switched on mentally.
Right.
If you're not in the right mental state, and like I said, I'm nowhere near the survival expert you are by any means. I mean, I shouldn't even say expert in this sentence, as I said, me. But, I've spent some pretty miserable times in the woods trying to make it through bad weather or whatever in the Army. And it's like, it's easy to see how someone who doesn't have the right mental approach could spiral.
Oh, yeah.
Either panic or
Quickly
spiral down into lethargy or, I don't want to say depression because that doesn't seem like the right word, but that feeling of I'm not going to do anything because it's hopeless,
Right. Well, here's some insight into one of the things that I do. And anybody that's listening that comes to one of our courses, then you're getting a heads up on something I'm going to do to you. At the end of we talked about survival a lot, and it's one of many things that we do. So I don't want to pigeonhole what it is that we do, but in survival, at the end of a basic survival class, a level 1 class, everybody has to test. And their test is they have to build shelter. They've got to build a fire. They got to boil water. They got to find some edible plants. We throw some land nav at them. They've got to build their shelter in a place that's safe. They got to have awareness. So I ask them questions about their surroundings and all that stuff. Here's what I do every time. So again, I tell everybody, you can use whatever you want to. And as soon as the test starts, I have what I call, because it's fun, strange and wonderfuls. Sometimes strange things happen to you. Sometimes wonderful things happen to you. And one of the strange things that I do every single time is I pick out the dude with the best gear who came and didn't want to do anything but really just show off his gear. And I tell him he just lost his pack and he doesn't get to take any of it with him. And I have had grown men just sit down and give up, and that's where my job comes in, and the other instructors at NRS. It's our job to then go to him and go, hey man, we've been teaching you how to handle this situation for the last couple of days. Get up and make it happen. And then they do. And so it's that giving up is something that I personally saw in my own self for the second 30 days where I almost died. I wanted to give up, and, I'm just being very frank and honest, and I'm not proud of this at all. And I just wanted to commit suicide. I just want to be done with it. I just wanted to be done. And I had to find a reason to not, and I did. And that helped me overcome this kicking myself in the pants. You're stupid, Craig. You're starving to death. You don't know what you're doing. You're going to die, and you're going to embarrass your family, and all these things that went through my head out in the middle of the woods by myself. I had to figure out how to get over that. And I'm glad I did, because we're here talking about it now. Right. And now I get to work with all kinds of people that deal with all sorts of issues, and I help them overcome, utilizing the environment, the woods, and survival and tracking to get over that. But it is one of those things that a lot of people, want to feel sorry for themselves, and you've got to figure out how to get over it.
And I would be willing to bet you that, like, anybody who's gone through like Ranger training, Special Forces training, SEALs training, right? Any of those things, MARSOC or Force Recon, like, everybody's had that moment at least once.
Mm-hmm.
In their head, they've had that moment where they're like, I just want to quit. It's just not worth it.
Sure.
But when you make it through that, when you decide not to quit, like, it literally changes your whole world for the rest of your life.
Right.
Like, when you make it through that moment where you're tested and you don't give up, you always have that to fall back on.
Right. Yeah. I feed off people like that. When we're fortunate enough to have a veteran come in that's been through that kind of training or experiences like that, then that person gets an opportunity to talk about it at our classes, because I'm not the only one that knows anything. We have a community of people that train and learn from one another. A perfect example, we had a survival class this past fall, and there was a young lady who came out of North Carolina who had lost her house due to all that flooding. And she was in a temporary situation, but she had already scheduled this class, and she wanted to study survival for disaster readiness. Okay. She found a way to email me. She's like, Craig, I've lost my house. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it, but I signed up for this very reason. I wanted to be able to take care of myself in bad situations. She made it. So on Saturday night of class, 2 hours, we got to ask her questions. I want to learn from people like that, okay, I'm here today, and now that's my house that just went down the river. What happened? Mindset, physical, even spiritual. What happened to you? How did you overcome it? The guys and gals that come in that have been through basic training, the guys that have been through the Q course and selection and all the things that go along with it. Those are the kind of people I want to give an opportunity. Like, how did you get through that crap? That's crazy. How did you do it? And with that said, I had a good instructor. One of my tracking instructors was an Army SF dude, and he told me a long time ago. He said, Craig, let the military do selection and the Q course and buds and all that stuff. He said, don't do that. You're an educator. It's not your job as Nature Reliance School to put people through that kind of crap. Let the military do that. And I had never engaged in that, but a lot of survival schools do exactly that. And I leave that up to the military. I'm an educator. It's my responsibility to educate people.
You see it like even in the firearms world. There's some, and you don't see it on the competitive side as much, but there are some instructors on like the defensive and the tactical side that want to be like drill sergeants.
Yeah.
And there's a time and a place for that. And the military does it for a reason, but the reason is not the learning environment.
Right.
They're doing something else by doing that. They're building esprit de corps. They're giving that rite of passage. They're testing your mettle to make sure you understand just what we just talked about, that you can make it through and not quit, even when you feel like quitting.
That's a
different thing than learning skill.
Oh, right? Yeah, absolutely.
I want the environment for people to learn skill to be as conducive to learning as possible.
Right. I love that. That's how we do things too. There was I taught a class down at the sawmill. You know where the sawmill is?
Yeah.
So I taught a class down there. It's been about 4 years ago. It was a man tracking class. And after class one night, upstairs at the sawmill, it was just the hangout. Let's talk. And there's all sorts of classes going on there. And there's a couple dudes at the table and me, and both of those two dudes, I didn't know who they were. We're all talking and they're drilling me with questions. They're asking me a million questions about stuff, kind of like you are, like tracking and how I apply what it is that I do and survival and navigation and how I utilize it. I had no idea who these guys were. Super nice guys. And I'm not going to say their names because I don't want to expose them to a broader audience, but incredibly nice, asking me questions and asking questions they wanted answers to help themselves with what they were doing. Then they connect with me on Instagram, find out one of them's, DevGru dude. Another dude is a Delta dude. And I'm like, these are the guys that are the shit, and who am I? I'm just a bushcraft woodsman guy. And they're asking me questions, which was a really good way for me to see. And I've seen this repeatedly over the years. People that want to go towards mastery are just looking to grow. And it doesn't matter who they get it from. They're growing. They're looking for help, whether it's you, me, a dude down the street that's I say this all the time, but one of the guys that taught me a lot of skill about being in the woods was a toothless dude that literally lived in a barn. Yeah. He didn't have a high school education, but this guy literally lived off the land every day of his life for 25 years before he died. And he taught me so much in 2 years because I would just go hang out with him and go through the woods, and he would like this, and this. And I mean, that I say that because mastery requires you to grow and learn whenever you can. And you need to be open to, you need to have the mindfulness, if we can use the word we've already discussed, and awareness to see it. Hey, it's in front of me right now. This is what I'm looking for. This is the person, this is the situation to learn from.
And you have to have your ego in check too. You can't have that arrogance of who are you? Just if what they're saying makes sense and it's valuable, it doesn't matter where it came from.
Exactly. And that was, I guess I didn't say it very well. You said it really well. That's what those guys pointed me towards. These are guys that I really look up to, I mean, they've done a lot of interesting work, really famous dudes in that community and in those communities. And they were asking me questions like I was the expert, which is just an indicator of somebody that is at that high level of whatever, was just seeking knowledge from whoever was in front of them.
Well, and one of the strengths of the special operations community has always been their willingness to seek out subject matter experts, whether it's shooting, whether it's tracking like you, whether it's canine handling or, free fall parachuting, or, they're seasoned enough and humble enough to realize that the military doesn't have all the answers to this stuff. Right. And if you want to really learn something, learn from the world's best. 100%. Learn from the sport parachutist, learn from the competitive shooter. Go seek those guys out, because that's the only thing they do, instead of having to do a whole bunch of other things as well. Right. Is what the soft guys have to do.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good indicator for everybody to be on the lookout for those people that are around us all the time. That's because they are. I mean, the information that you're seeking, the skill you're looking, I call it mindset, skills, tactics, and gear, the 4 puzzle pieces of self-reliance. You've got to have good mindset. You got to have good skills. Tactics is just a fancy word for teamwork, and gear, that's my approach to it.
Well, no,
Matt.
but that holds true for everything. If you think about it,
Mhm.
like everything we're talking about, whether it's, self-defense in terms of combatives or shooting, whether it's military tactics, whether it's like those 4 things are universal, right?
Sure.
You've got to have equipment that works and is solid and is reliable. You've got to have sound tactics. You've got to be mentally in the right place, and you got to have the hard physical skills. And if you're missing any of those 4 legs, the table's not going to stand up too well.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm actually going to steal that. I'm stealing your 4 pillars.
Well, I stole it from some military dude a long time ago. I can't even remember where I got it. And I tried to tell people, I don't remember where I got it. Now, I've heard it from other instructors a couple of times, but I'm sure I read it in a book a long time ago. Mindset, skills. It was tactics there. Teamwork. One definition of tactics is the strategic methodology of achieving a common goal among people. That's teamwork. It's just a fancy word for teamwork, but I like it. Because if we take this case of this super nice lady that came to class from North Carolina, the thing that she kept saying over and over is know your neighbors.
Yeah.
When your house is gone and your neighbor right there does have a house, then that's shelter, and you should know them already.
Think about this too. Like in the year 2025, how many of our neighbors do we not know?
Oh yeah.
Like community is not what it was before. Community has become more of an online thing than an in-person thing. And while it's cool for me to be able to talk to friends like you that are across the country that I haven't talked to in years because we communicate online,
right.
That's the good part of it.
Yeah.
The bad part of it is neglecting the community that's actually around you.
Sure. I mean, I've got neighbors, and I tell every time I teach a class, particularly when I'm teaching something focused on disaster readiness, where you're trying to get ready for tornado or earthquake or floods or whatever, is one of the biggest things you can do is reach your hand over the fence and shake your neighbor's hand and know them by name. Hey, what's going on, Matt? How's your wife doing? How's work going? Did you get all that stuff fixed? Whatever, those kind of conversations are going to be needed when the tornado hits and takes out half the neighborhood, kind of thing. So absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's a larger issue there that probably is beyond the scope of the podcast, but yeah, I think we've gained a lot with technology, but if we're not careful, we could wind up losing a lot of vital things as well.
Well, I mean,
back to the analogy, right? Back to land navigation. How many people rely on a GPS now?
Absolutely.
Which is great till the GPS breaks or you lose it.
Yeah. Yeah. You never want to depend upon anything that requires batteries. That doesn't mean it doesn't enhance your life. I mean, think about comms. I mean, comms are vital, but man, when they go down, they go down. And how are you going to communicate? It's very problematic. Same thing with the GPS. We talk about pace plans when it comes to communications, but you need to have a pace plan for everything: shelter,
yes,
water, food, comms, first aid. All those things need their own pace plan. It's critical.
And back to the military stuff, right? Like things like that have stood me perhaps in, I shouldn't say better stead than the more severe stuff, but let's just say more frequent use, right? Pace plans, backwards planning, decision-making process, like all of that stuff I use every day.
Right.
For everything.
Oh, me too, man.
It gives you a framework to make plans and decisions with.
The first course I ever did for the 101st was I've been teaching people, just regular people. I had done, I trained a lot of law enforcement in the martial arts, so I had an in there. So I taught some of the outdoor stuff for law enforcement too. But the first time I did a big military gig was for the 101st, and I had to put together a risk assessment, risk analysis, and mitigation plan for that training. And I'm like, I've always done this in my head. I never had to write it up, put it together, and make sure that everything was covered. And now It's one of the greatest things that ever happened to me, man, because I did it and I did it well. Now I do it. And we actually do a short brief at the beginning of every class. And we talk about, and this is at the beginning of every class I teach, what are the problems that are going to come up? What are the solutions to those problems?
Yep.
And that is how I'll walk out the door every day now. What are the problems today that could come up? Do I have solutions for that? And I better have solutions for it, or I'm not ready.
And that sort of, once that sort of thinking process becomes internalized, it's amazingly applicable, like you said, to literally everything you do.
Right.
And I don't say that I consciously go through it for everything I do, but it's like a program running that's not an open window. It's like your antivirus program. It's always running in the back of my head.
Well, I use a martial arts analogy for this one too, but it has been my experience, and Matt, maybe yours is different, but you train for a certain amount of time, and then you get up to, right before Shodan, or, what most people call a brown belt in most martial arts systems. Brown belts are the cockiest. They're just terrible. I was one of them, particularly in judo. You're always thinking about how you're going to crush somebody's skull, and yeah.
I hadn't even hit puberty yet when I was a brown belt the first time around. Right? I was a little brat.
And what was this? In
karate? Yeah, okay. Shotokan. Yeah, I was a brat. I swear to God.
Yeah, I understand.
I deserve to get thumped.
Well, and then you get, and it's so true in most traditional systems where they say, all right, you get your black belt, and the general public think, all right, black belt, ooh, and it truly is the beginner's belt. I mean, it's where you start to relax with your training, and you blend with things more than you just force your way. As a brown belt, I wanted fights. I wanted to fight people. I wanted to throw down and chunk somebody on their head. I'm not happy with myself for saying that even, but it's true.
Well, the Japanese call it the nail sticking up out of the roof, right? Like I think it's part of the process. Like everybody goes through it. It's the people that don't outgrow it that are the problem.
Yeah. And that's what we try to do with mitigation of risk and risk assessment, risk analysis at classes, and just life in general is open your eyes to, well, maybe a better way of saying is not sticking our heads in the sand and ignoring it, not allowing normalcy bias to run our lives. Most of us allow normalcy bias to run our lives, where we normalize everything because we're kind of inclined to do that as a species, but we've got to learn to control that rather than allowing that to control us.
I think another part of it too, like the important mindset shift is, and I guess the best way to explain this is two ways I can explain this. One is like, one of the unique things about Army SF is how they don't have a whole lot of support for their classic mission. Like they're just out there by themselves, right? So because of that, unlike some of the other soft units that have a lot of support and are kind of pumped up and told they're invulnerable, SF guys in the very beginning are told how vulnerable they are.
Nice.
Like you're out there by yourself. Like no one is coming to save you. Things can go south really quick.
Right.
And that kind of gives you a different attitude than some of the other soft units. And I think this carries over in general to just a general observation on people that have seen a lot of violence and participated in a lot of violence. And because of my careers, both my careers, I have seen and participated in a lot of violence. I never want to get into a fight again. I mean, if I have to, I will, and I'm going to end it quickly. But
sure,
I understand how bad things can go, no matter how good you are.
Mm-hmm.
When I was younger, I didn't always understand that. I had that false sense of invulnerability, right? When I was a young man. But as you get older and you start seeing enough things happen, you start to realize that a lot of it is random. Like they call it violence for a reason. It's violent. It's chaotic. It's unpredictable. It's not a movie. It's violent.
Right.
And I think that a healthy respect for that, and this carries over like we'll take skydiving. We'll take free fall parachuting, right? Which is something that I used to love to do. The people that are the most at risk of severe injury or death in skydiving are your brand new beginners and your people that have thousands and thousands of jumps. Because they
So why are
become
the
so
experienced? They're just so complacent.
exactly.
There's no fear at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that maintaining that healthy respect for what can happen is a vital thing to hang on to, no matter what it is you're doing. If there's risk, like, you've got to, like, riding motorcycles. I love riding motorcycles. I don't split lanes like a madman because I know how bad that can get in a moment.
Right.
Doesn't matter how fun it is. The risk is not worth the reward. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And I think it's kind of the same thing. You have to have that healthy respect for the actual risk you're facing, no matter what your skill level is, no matter how good you are at it. And I'm not saying you should be afraid. It can be like a calm respect. You know what I mean?
Sure.
A confident and calm, but still respect for it, knowing that things can go south.
Yeah, I'm very fond of this of saying that many of my friends that have done the work like you have done are some of the nicest people in the world because they know what's on the other side of violence. And there's what's this old cliche of that's not cliche, but a quote about sit around the fire with warriors. The conversation is different.
Yeah.
I get a grand opportunity. I do some nonprofit work for Camp Hero of Kentucky, where I literally train veterans and first responders that are suffering from post-traumatic stress. We call it mental health maintenance. And we don't go down there and do kumbaya stuff. I get their hands dirty and we build fires and shelters and, that can track and look at trees and stuff like that. And the conversation is different. And a lot of those people that are there and a lot of people that I've trained in martial arts with, like you, and, particularly all the man tracking I've done, there's a lot of people there that have seen a lot of violence, and they're just the nicest people in the world because they don't want to set themselves up to be in the middle of that. They don't have to be. So, but that doesn't mean we're not ready for it.
Yeah, and here's something that, like,
am I saying that right, Matt? I mean, you would be
I think so. I think
okay.
so. Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to add, I had a thought that I was going to add. So the flip side of the coin is that the people that have never, and there's so many now, most people have never been in a physical fight at all now. They've never been in the schoolyard fight, never had any of that. And those people confuse an ability at violence with a propensity for violence. And they're not the same thing. And usually a high ability at violence is the opposite of a propensity for violence for the reasons we just talked about.
Right. Yeah. I like you saying that. I've learned a lot by you saying that. That's really good. I haven't heard it said exactly that way, the propensity of violence.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people I want to be around, though, Matt. I mean, I really do. Those are the kind of people I want to be around. I mean, I want to know that, hey, I've got people around me, and I do. I have people around me that are capable of such violence, but they're the funnest guys to be around the campfire with.
Well, and it comes down to, I don't think it's the violence itself that creates that character, that personality. But think about your 30 days that you talked about that you weren't sure you were going to survive. I guarantee you came out of that a changed man.
Oh yeah. And so I see the same people with a totally different avenue of training that we're describing in survival and bushcraft. They've watched so many YouTube videos and they've watched all the TV bullshit shows and all that stuff. And they think they know survival. And I mean, and they might know something. I'm not saying they don't, but realistically, unless you, and this is as it relates to survival in particular, who's an expert? The person that's, I mean, how do you get to be an expert of survival? And I had this struggle writing books for my publisher. They were like, Craig, you keep writing about how you screwed things up. You need to write about how well you did things. You're an expert. And I'm like, but I became an expert, if that's what
by screwing things up. Yeah.
I don't like that word even, but I became an expert by screwing so many things up, getting lost, 30 days without backup, all the stupid things that I've done. And it helped me become who I am. And, that's where I want to be.
Well, and that kind of ties back into what we were talking about too, right? Like, so take Masashi for an example. I was such a warped teenager. Masashi was my hero. Like, that's who I wanted to be as a teenager. Yeah. Which explains a lot of my life choices.
Right.
But anyway,
I'm sure.
He went through this incredibly violent period of his life, right? Testing himself, putting himself in life or death situations. And to be honest, I'm not saying it was the smartest thing to do, but I kind of tried to do the same thing in my own way as much as you can in our time.
Right.
When you can't go around challenging people to duels.
Right.
But I did as much of that sort of thing as I could. And I no longer have the desire to do much of that sort of thing, to be honest. I'm not saying I don't want to prove myself or test myself, because that's continual. It's always ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't need to be fighting bad guys on the west side of Chicago. I don't need to be, kicking down doors in Basra, Iraq anymore, right? That's just not
right.
That's not who I am now. Excuse me. But I don't think I would be who I am if I hadn't gone through that period.
And you wouldn't have, Matt. There's no doubt.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%. There's no way you would be who you are without those experiences. That is who you are.
Or living in the dojo on Ravenswood and
right.
Yeah, I think all of that mattered. And I think there's both a danger to our development as fully realized human beings, both by not doing a time in our life like that, and also by not letting go of that time in our life.
I've really struggled with trying to open the door for people that want to do. I don't know how far to go back, but there's so many people that have not had I'm just going to say it this way, this coming of age experience.
Rite of passage. Yeah.
Rite of passage. That's a better way of saying it.
We don't have a rite of passage in our culture anymore, unless you join the military.
Exactly.
Or do some martial arts. Some martial arts have it, some don't. But unless you find these niche fringe communities, and I don't want to say the military is fringe, but it really kind of is these days.
Yeah. What is it? What's the percentage of Americans that go in the military? I mean, it's small. It's 4 or 5%.
I'm not sure, but I can tell you that it was 0.45 of 1% of America served in the war on terror.
Oh, wow. What a small percentage.
So it is kind of a fringe community.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't mean that in a bad way.
Mm-hmm.
By any
I
of the things I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm with you.
They're not the mainstream. And if you don't join one of those communities, what rite of passage do you have?
You don't. And I think we need it. All the cultures before ours had that. And there was a reason for that. Now that'd be another podcast too. What are the reasons for that? And we're missing that. And so we see people, and let's just be all like internet meme-ish on this too. What's that old saying about, it's an internet saying is like, I can't remember, but basically you got somebody smarting off to you because they've never had their head bashed in or seen anybody.
Oh yeah, never been punched in the grill. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying that I necessarily want to be an advocate of violence for the sake of violence, but man, there's something about the days that even in elementary school of whooping somebody's ass out back, and then let's just get on with it. Now we got that settled and let's move on.
And the ability to move on.
Yeah. And probably be brothers or friends after that,
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably. And I think that rite of passage matters. And here's why I think it matters. We have an innate desire to prove our worth as human beings, as men, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I know that's not politically correct, but that's just the way it is. Some women have that desire. I don't think they all do. I don't think they all should necessarily. I'm not saying they shouldn't either, but you know what I'm saying.
No, I'm with you.
It's more of a masculine trait. And I think that if you've never had that, you have this hole that you try to fill with other things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of this like toxic aggression we see online on social media, and a lot of this like cultural stuff going on. I think a lot of it has to do with never having actually proved your worth to yourself at something that mattered, something bigger than yourself.
Yep.
And I think that's what the rite of passage gives you. And yeah, some of them in some cultures may have been kind of goofy or whatever, but
Sure.
if you have that, if you sought that out and you have that, whether through, being a live-in student at a dojo, whether through joining the military, whether through joining a police department in a big city or a small town. I shouldn't knock the small towns, but you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
Something where you had to meet a standard and prove yourself. And then meeting that standard gave you the right to be part of a group. That gives a kind of understanding, not just of yourself, but also of your place among peers that you never really get otherwise, I think.
I'm with you. That's the teamwork side of the mindset, skills, teamwork, and gear. I mean, once you've, there's nothing like we do teach a SEER course. It's a civilian version of a SEER course. Every class I teach, if people fail, I feel like I have not done my job. But in SEER, I know people are going to fail because we push them hard.
I have some offline stories to tell you about SEER school sometime. Okay. Oh my God. Oh.
But one of the things that we get out of our SEER students is when they've gone through what we call the gauntlet and come out the other side of it, they are friends forever. Forever. And it's a great thing to see as the director of Nature Reliance School, where I've got these guys that are like, man, what do you need? I will be there. Or that was awesome. It's just like you were saying, SEER class is the only class we have where what happens at SEER stays at SEER. Kind of, I don't talk about it, but there's something about it, man. And people need to do that kind of
bonding
thing.
Through shared suffering, right? Like,
yeah.
So there were some guys on my ODA that we probably would not have been friends if we weren't on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But they're not just my friends now, they're family.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they could show up at my door unannounced. I'd be like, hey, come on in. I'll make up the guest room for you.
Right.
Sure.
It's
just, you go through so much together and you rely on each other for your lives. The stuff that annoys you about them or that you argue about seems somehow less important. Yeah. When you know that this guy would lay down his life for yours and vice versa, right?
Right.
And that's just, there's not enough of that today. There's just not.
Now, people don't have to even argue for one another anymore, let alone physically fight, let alone go into battle. I mean, that progression there in and of itself is something that most people don't do any of those things. They don't, publicly debate and logic and reason with other people. Or, our politicians are just moaning and groaning at each other. They don't even have good debate and logical reasoning skills anymore, which is a part of this as well, I think, and that way you can solve as many problems you can with your words. And when you can't, you went out back and whoop one another. I mean, it's part of it.
Well, and so I'm a big believer in the importance of critical thinking, right? And I think that's one of the ways that our education system has failed the younger generations.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the reasoning behind the classical education wasn't because reading the Odyssey or the Iliad in and of itself made you smarter. But reading all the classic works of like literature and philosophy, what it did was it enabled you to think critically and evaluate someone's idea based on logic and reasoning, not feelings. Right. And we're missing that. And I never actually thought of that until just now. But I think another way you learn critical thinking is by these situations, working with a team in difficult environments. You're evaluating what you're going to do next, not about whether it's what you want to do or whether it feels nice or whether it makes you feel all warm and fuzzy inside, is what will have the greatest chance of keeping us alive.
Right.
And that gives you a whole different way of looking at things.
That's, we go through STOPA, Stop, Think, Observe, Plan, Actively Stay Alive, which is another survival acronym that I stole from the military. It works. And one of the things that I require, like I'm going to require it first thing out of the box when students show up this weekend for this knife only thing, is going through STOPA. Stop, think, observe. Let's make a plan. Let's get after it. Let's go actively get this done. We've got to find shelter now. It's going to rain in 3 hours. We've got to find shelter. And that is the process of working together. And some of these people know each other, some of them don't. And within minute one, they are going to have to learn how to lead when they need to lead and follow when they need to follow. And there's a time for understanding both, in my opinion. Without a doubt. I mean, you've got to recognize, and we've talked about, you've mentioned it, you brought me on because I know survival and bushcraft. If I'm going to do the myriad of things that you teach, then I need to listen to you and shut up. I mean, I know that. And it's a good thing about being around a lot of highly qualified people in different fields is, it, from a critical thinking perspective, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need to shut up and listen. And there's nothing wrong with that being important.
One of the greatest logical fallacies I've seen in people that haven't been tested in like high risk situations, people that have lived like, calmer, more quiet lives, which is fine. I'm not knocking that.
Mm-hmm.
But people that are very intelligent and very educated in one particular field and have never been challenged in a life or death situation tend to think they are competent at every field because they're so good at one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not the case. Yeah, that's just not the case.
Yep.
Right.
We had a guy, Matt, that come. I'm not going to name the school, but we had one of my goals in life is to develop an objective methodology for testing man trackers.
Oh,
because what's happening now, what is happening, the home for all man tracking for the Army was Fort Huachuca because it's considered an intelligence thing. And most of the tracking that happened out there, that's Huachuca, that's desert, that's sand. And then, I'm sorry, not sorry, but it's easy to track there. It's not easy to track in the woods of Kentucky. It's harder. I've tracked in both, and I can say that from experience. But one of the things that's happened over the years is that tracking testing is very subjective from the instructor's role. And, my goal has been, all right, because I have a degree in statistics, and my goal has always been to orient testing to data, provable data, so that number one, if I train fifth group again, that I can go to this colonel and go, okay, these guys achieved this in the testing, and here's the numbers, colonel. You can look at it, or captain, or whoever,
Viable metrics.
Viable metrics. I've got to have that viable metrics, and that is something that has been a goal of mine for tracking. But what happens is we had our first testing of that this past summer, and we had guys that were really good trackers that didn't even come close to passing what I would consider a hard test, but not an impossible test. I want to be able to create people that's, if they get a tracker patch from us, people know that dude can track. So, because we've got several different agencies here in the state that use tracking all the time here in Kentucky. And if they got one of our patches on, I want this unit, whether it's SRT or Fish and Wildlife, to know that dude knows how to track, kind of thing. That test has got to be, I want it to be hard. And so there were people that were just, they didn't even get close, man. And it was just like we were talking about earlier. They were just like, huh? They were lost. I know how to track. No, evidently you don't. And because the test is hard, but it's not impossible.
Right.
Because we had people pass it. It wasn't like nobody passed it. People passed it.
I can see how, and from my limited knowledge in it, right, I can see how it'd be easy for the standards to be very subjective.
Most of it is. In most schools, and I'm trying to overcome that. There's going to be, and that goes back to, maybe we can get into that too, but are these things a science or are they an art? And I think that's a good question to look at a lot of different things. And tracking, from my perspective, is a science. you don't have to be born with some particular mojo to be able to track. You just got to track. You got to put the dirt time in, and getting out there.
So you mean it's not like the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie where you touch the ground and in your head you see what the guy did?
Man, I wish that was true.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. I need to make a video sometime.
Which was very well filmed, by the way. I like the way it was done. But
yeah, that's
it's not some psychic ability.
No, and I've been to a class where how to do that was taught. I'm just saying. Oh, we'll leave that there. I'm not mentioning any names, but I don't do that. I want to be able to look at that track and know that that person has turned and went that direction, even though I can't find that they went that direction in tracks over here. Knowing, okay, because if I'm tracking this dude and he's killed somebody, I can either eliminate all that because I can read in that one track that he went that way, and then I can push my team that way and go get this dude instead of pushing wasted resources over here on this area over here. And I mean, if I can read that in one track, then that's what I want to be able to do, and I want to train people to be able to do that. But no, it's not touching touching the track. Oh, I love it. Tracking is so full of that crap, man. It's full of it.
I did enjoy that movie, cheesy as it was, I gotta admit.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, you've got to, man. That stuff's entertainment is there for a reason, and that's one of the things that comes out of survival TV, for example, in the movies and martial arts and stuff, is that just realize it's entertainment, enjoy it, have fun with it. Just just break away from your normal day to day for a while and have fun.
Oh, my Angela, my wife, I will admit she gets tired of me going, that's not the way you do that.
I'm sure. Dude, I am such a novice.
Our mind is, that's not how that works. That's not how any of that works.
I can't imagine guys like you, man. I mean, even somebody like me that hears them take the safety off of a Glock, I will bring that up to my wife. And that's just me. I mean, I can't imagine with all the training that you guys have. I don't know how you all can watch a movie.
Oh yeah, the Glock safety sound is my favorite. It's like, what?
Did I just hear that?
Do you have a loose part that's rattling around in there? What's going on?
And please tell me. I mean, because I can't even remember what I watched the other night. Every weapon that was picked up, they had to put one in the chamber. I'm like, does nobody walk around in the Secret Service with a round in the chamber?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, man.
Yeah.
Nobody. It's cool.
We saw one. Angela and I were watching, and she's really good with the firearms handling because she's a competitive shooter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The tactic side is more me like going, no, that's not how you do that. But there was one, and what was it that happened? It was like the heroine, the girl boss heroine shot somebody, and then something else happened, and she racked the same gun to chamber around. And I'm like,
sweet.
Did you have a malfunction? What happened?
What's going on here? Oh man, that's funny.
All right, we've gone well over an hour, my friend. So why don't you tell everybody how to find you, how to get your books, how to find your classes and all that stuff, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, so thanks for saying that and offering me the opportunity to do this, Matt. It's you can find me at naturereliance.org. That's my website, naturereliance.org. If you put it in the description, I'll send you a link tree, an email, and you'll have my link. Got links.
Yeah, let's do that.
I'll just send that to you. But I'm on all the socials, YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, as Nature Reliance, at Nature Reliance on all those. So you can find us pretty easily there. But the hub for everything is naturereliance.org. I teach in-person classes. I have an online school where I teach a lot of this stuff online, teach you how to, you can be anywhere in the world and train with me kind of thing. So yeah, we have a good time, man. Thank you for letting me be on, and thanks for letting me do that.
Are your books on Amazon? How do people get your books?
Yeah. So the books are all the books except one are on Amazon. One book is in the online membership. It's a disaster readiness book, so it's only available to members of my online membership. But yeah, everything's on Amazon. But that link tree that I'll send you has links to my Amazon and everything. That way you have it, and your listeners that are interested can click on any of this stuff that I've talked about.
All right, cool. I really enjoyed catching up with you, man. It's
I did
been
too,
too
man.
long since we
Been
talked.
good.
This has been good. Well, I'm telling you guys, I've known Craig a long time, and he puts a lot of diligent work into everything he does. And if you're interested at all in any of these things, survival, tracking, any of this stuff, definitely seek him out. It'll be well worth the time. I guarantee it. Hope everybody enjoyed the episode, and we'll talk to all of you guys next time.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.